Good morning. So before we get started today, I do have a couple of announcements. First is a community task force. Maybe you've seen some of the emails that have been sent around or know somebody that's involved with this. But here in Meadville, we have a community task force that's happening. And we're looking for volunteers, either to be on the communications team, to call your neighbors, see how everybody's doing, check in, and report any needs that need to be serviced to the service team. This would include things like going to get groceries for people that can't get out, or bringing mail by their house. And we have a health team as well that's directing how to do this safely so that nobody will be put at risk. If you'd like to volunteer for either of those two teams, I'm going to leave the link to the forms and where you can sign up below in the YouTube video. If you click show more, I believe below the video, it will show you those links. I'm also going to include in those links a link to a virtual Bible study that we're going to have here on April 1st via Zoom. And so you'll need a Zoom meeting ID and a Zoom password. And beforehand, you'll need to download Zoom to your computer and or phone. You can call in as well to Zoom. So it's not all just video. If you don't have a computer that has a camera, you can use your smartphone. And if you don't have a smartphone, you can just use a regular phone and dial in, and it's just like a conference call. And we're going to be studying the book of James. So I think that's good. And in keeping our connection, I've talked with my friend Harlan. Many of you know him. He's filled in once or twice for me. And we're going to hook up with Grandview United Methodist Church. And maybe some other people will be on there. And hopefully some of you will be on there. And anybody else. This will be 10 a.m. Wednesday, April 1st. I promise you this is not an April Fool's joke. So we'll have that. I'll have the information in the bottom of this video as well. And if you need to, you can text me or email me, and I'll probably email this out anyway. That being said, friends, let us worship this morning. And our scripture for this morning is taken from the Gospel according to John, chapter 11, verses 1 through 45. So it's fairly long, so just bear with me. But we're talking about Lazarus here. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was ill. And so the sisters sent him to him, saying, Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. It is for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and are you going there again? And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. After saying these things, he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought that they meant taking rest in sleep. Then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. So Thomas, called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Now when Jesus came, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles off, and many of the Jews who had come to Martha and Mary to console them concerning their brother. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him. But Mary remained seated in the house. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you have been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know whatever you ask from God, God will give you. And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. And everyone who lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this?" She said to him, "Yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world." When she had said this, she went and called her sister Mary, saying in private, "The teacher is here and is calling for you." And when she heard it, she rose quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the village, but was still in the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary rise quickly and go out, they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb to weep. Now that when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." Jesus wept. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying?" Then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days." Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone, and Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this on account of the people standing around, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out!" The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. Friends, this is the word of God for the people of God. All thanks be to God. Have you ever catch yourself saying, "If only"? If only I had done this instead of that. If only this one little thing had changed. I remember a time in my life when I had said "if only." I was graduating high school and I was running for the state FFA officer team. And I was rather shy and I didn't like to talk a whole lot. Been a chapter officer, and I remember walking into that interview. And there's people in this interview that I know, some that I didn't. And I sat down. We started having the interview. You know, and it's like any job interview, really. They ask you about yourself and you tell them. And so I was very straight and to the point with all of their questions. Gave them the answers. And they weren't bad answers, they were good answers. But they wanted me to develop them more for them. And I failed to do that. And so I ended up not getting a state officer position, which is fine. It works out in the end. But I remember talking to a friend of mine that was on that committee after I had done the interview. And she told me the reason that they had selected me, or not selected me, and they had selected somebody else, was because this person was a lot more outgoing and was willing to just elaborate on the answers a lot more than what I was doing. And as I grew up and time went on, I stopped to think about this. Well, what if I had elaborated more on those answers? What if I had changed this? What if I had been elected a state officer? Because mind you, not being elected allowed me to go to the University of Wisconsin. It allowed me to do a lot of other things that wouldn't have happened if I had done that. And we can play this what if game all day long. And it's one of those things that we used to do in history when I was an undergraduate. What if this had happened instead of that? What if George Washington had never crossed the Delaware, right? And you can play these what if games, and sometimes they're very intriguing, and we can play them forever. But when was the last time that you said, what if? What if you'd only worked a bit harder and not failed that exam? What if only a different politician had been elected? What if we hadn't decided to go on vacation that week? Whatever it is that we start thinking to ourselves over time, if only the clock could be turned back. And that is, of course, this wistful dream, right? We can't go back in time. But there's this kind of nostalgia, not for the past as it was, but for the present that could have been. If only the past had just been a little bit different. If only the past had been that what if. That's precisely what's on the minds of Lazarus' family. All that and more is here in Martha's if only to Jesus as he arrives in Bethany. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. She knows that Jesus has been there. He would have cured Lazarus. And she probably knows, too, that it had taken Jesus at least 2 days longer to get there than she had hoped. Lazarus has already been dead for a few days, but perhaps he might just have made it, if only. But Jesus' reply to Martha invites her to a different sort of thought, a different sort of if only. Instead of dwelling on the past and dreaming about what might have been, Jesus invites Martha to look into the future. And Martha does that. She knows that her brother will be raised in the resurrection on the last day. But now Jesus asks her to imagine that this future is suddenly brought forward into the present. Martha, like the other Jews of her time, believed that there was this future resurrection. They believed that all the heavens and the earth would be made new, and in which God would enhance all the beauty in the present, would be abolish all the pain, the ugliness, and the grief of the world. Within that new world, they believed all God's people from ancient times until their present time would be given new bodies to share and relish this resurrection life in new creation. Martha believes all this, right? And she believes that her brother Lazarus will be a part of it too. But her conversation with Jesus indicates that there's not a very comforting thought at the moment. And she certainly isn't prepared for Jesus' response. I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus says he's telling her that the future has burst into the present, that a new creation, and with it, and the resurrection has come into the now, the current, and it's present in him. I am the resurrection and the life. Jesus, in essence, is challenging Martha. He's urging her to change her if only for an if Jesus. If Jesus is who she is coming to believe he is, if Jesus is the Messiah, the one who was promised by the prophets, the one who has come into the world, if Jesus is God's own Son, then the one in whom the living God is strangely and newly present, if he is a resurrection in person, life, come to life, can we see the difference? Can we see the difference? And can we feel the difference, for that matter? Can we feel that pain and that doubt beginning to get lifted? And as Martha stood in the road that day and watched Jesus approach, she was stuck in the past. All she could think about was the if only. Friends, it's easy to linger in that place, to stay on the road with Martha. Let our anger boil, sometimes boil over. But being angry doesn't remove the hurt or the pain or the grief. Wondering if only doesn't change what has already happened. See, we're in this situation now, right? And we can say, what if? Very confidently. What if? What if this virus had never spread? What if it had been contained? What if it had never been developed? What if it had never come into being? What if? And it's not going to remove the pain. Playing what if. Not going to remove the pain for all the people that have lost loved ones. For all the people that have been affected economically by this. What if doesn't change a thing? If only doesn't change a thing. But if Jesus does, even though that it's hard to acknowledge, we know the truth deep down inside. So I would invite you today, if you're feeling like that, and if you have an if you have that if only or that what if in your heart or on your mind right now, to put yourself into Martha's shoes. Run off to meet Jesus. Tell him the problem. You can even ask him why he didn't come sooner if you need to. Why he allowed the awful things to happen. And then be prepared for a surprising response. Be prepared to move to a new place. See, there's no way to predict what that response might be. For Christ always works in unexpected ways. God's intention is to give us good things. God's intention is to make things better. The good news of this passage is that Jesus will respond. Jesus will meet your problem with some new part of God's future that can and will burst into your present time. It's going to burst into this mess, this grief. God's presence will just become on the scene, this future that He has for us because of the good news. It will come with hope, with new possibilities that are greater than you could ever imagine. And the key to it all now as then is faith. We have to believe in Jesus. We have to trust that He really is God's Messiah, the one coming into the world, into our world, into our pain, into our sorrow, into death. When Jesus arrived at the tomb, his friend Lazarus, the Bible tells us, the shortest verse actually, he wept. He cried along with Martha and Mary and all of those people who had been mourning Lazarus' death for days. Friends, Christ meets us in our pain and in our grief. Christ struggles with the mess and the chaos of each and every one of our lives. Christ even cries with us. But he doesn't leave us there. Just as he didn't leave Martha wondering if only on the road, or Lazarus dead in the tomb. And when we have faith enough to run with Martha and meet Jesus in the road with everything that burdens us and holds us down, makes us struggle, then he'll help us move to a new place. He'll show us this resurrection and life, hope and grace and love, if only we will go to him. If Jesus. I realize this is not how we normally do church. And I know things might get worse before they get better. I know we're anxious to get back, and that might not be in the near future. It may be that we are celebrating Easter in this format. And I had a conversation this morning with Bill Eric, and we were talking about it, trying to find the positive in things. And I just kind of wanted to share a brief snippet of our conversation from this morning, or the other day. And it went something along the lines of maybe finding the good in this is the resurrection. That when we come back together, that when we go back to the way things are, what we would call normal, and we've survived this, we'll realize that the resurrection, that Easter, isn't just a day on the calendar, right? It's so much more. Easter is something that we have in our hearts every day of the year. Easter, friends, is a way of life. It's a way of celebrating if Jesus. And I think this is a really good time to remember that. It's a really good time to embrace it. And maybe this is something that we can take away from the current situation that will help us in the future. Please go this morning. Be safe. Be well. Know that God has you and is with you. I ask that he bless you all with the peace that passes all understanding, the great shalom. And until we meet again, may you all be kept safe and well, and your family as well. Amen.